Everybody's welcome. This is that time of the year when we begin to count down. Nearly everybody on this earth is thinking of another year. You're thinking of 2026. And we're doing this because, like they say, that it is the big masquerade that ends the ritual dance. And who else do you think I should bring onto you for book chat, the very last one for 2025? He's no other than Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi. He is a professor of communication and a pioneering scholar in diasporic, strategic, and development communication. He holds a PhD in communication studies from the University of Leeds, United Kingdom, which he earned following the prestigious British Chevening Scholarship for his master's degree. His doctoral research on digital diasporas was among the earliest African Center communication theses published online by the University of Leeds and is widely cited in the field. He has authored over 40 peer-reviewed journal articles and books. He has served as head of Department of Mass Communication. He's also been Dean of Postgraduate Studies and currently as University Registrar. He has held visiting professorship at the American University of Nigeria, the University of Abuja, and Kogi State University in Kaba, and he regularly serves as an external examiner. Adeniyi's major books include the new one that we'll be talking about today, which is New Hidden Narratives of African Migration, Exploring Media and the Contestation of Place. It is published by Palmgrave Macmillan. As well as Diasporic Communication in Digital Age, From Newsroom to Classroom, and Media Conflicts and the National Security Question. His current research focuses on media, governance, migration, and strategic communication in African and Global South contexts. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're far away from me, but you are behind the screen watching this. Help me welcome Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. You're welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much, Prof. I am highly honored, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Very good. So we will be talking about something hidden. Like they say, you are the light of the world. You cannot hide your light. But this book tackles more than just news. It explores the human heart of movement. And I'm sure you must be a very good student of Exodus, movement of Jah people. The book also challenges stereotypes and reveals the emotional truth behind the headlines. So let's start this way. What prepared you to be the one and the driver's seat of this book?
Well, thank you very much once again. It's a great privilege to be given this opportunity to share my thoughts, to provide insights, into the book, which is still to be released, but of course works, at the business stage now. I have followed migration and diasporic movement of Nigerians and, of course, by extension, Africans in the last 20 years or so. And of course, my PhD is centered around a Nigerian diaspora, looking at how they construct nationalism, in the distance, how identity is shaped, and of course, how they communicate between themselves, between their hosts, and of course, how they communicate, if at all, with homeland. Then what are the issues that are arising in the process? How is belonging fostered, and how is remembrance and memories rekindled as a new set of migrants that is moving into the class of diasporic community, in the manner in which we'll class the Jews, the Armenians, the Germans in Argentina, the Australians in East Coast, London, the Okongas in Canada, the Indians in America, etc., etc. it's been a difficult thing, really, for people to see Nigerians as diasporic, wanting to see them only as migrants, because of the preponderance of economic reasons, for their migration. But of course, they are becoming increasingly diasporic on account of their abundantness, on account of how belonging is shaped among them, irrespective of their ethnic cleavages.
Mm,
The enclavization that serves to divide them, which is denying them of that classification as diasporic. But again, we took solace in the classification of the World Bank that sees all of them as diasporic citizens on account of their economic significance through remittance. So I follow this, and I think that there's actually the need to continue to update circumstances around them. Circumstances often dwell on matters of economics, matters of conflict, matters of disease, matters of wars, and matters around the fact that citizens are completely faithless about their country. And because they are faithless, they keep externalizing hope, looking for plan B countries. And because they are looking for plan B countries, anything around them should just be limited to those issues alone. But there
mm,
are emotional and sentimental issues that are still deep-seated that needs to be addressed. After all, these fellows are humans. There are fractures among them, there are fragmentations, there are emotional bruises, there are trials and triumphs, there are silent battles in which they are waging and they are winning. And of course, there are also moments of solitude where they introspect and they come up with some strong narratives that are consequential enough to shape the outward realities that literature is concentrating on. And so, because of this determination, and you find that the story of migration and diaspora is never ending. And because it
mm,
is never ending, new realities are emerging. But beyond the new realities, beyond the ones that we know, that we are familiar with, what are the hidden nuances? What are the subterranean issues, that we are not necessarily looking at? And I'm not saying I'm the first person to do it, really. There have been some outstanding authors who have tried to look at these other narratives. Kole is there, Miria Jojo is there, and quite a number of them. But I'm looking at
mm,
it from the point of view of a participant observer, and from the point of view of somebody who's looking at it from the center, from the point of view of the African, of the
mhm.
Nigerian, who is immersed in the data and who will probably give it some other kind of interpretation so that they can be fresh insights and probably some marginal contribution to literature on migration and diasporic studies.
I hear you clean and clear, brother. I hear you. And I see the passion in which you have attacked and approached this issue. But let's go back to the basic. The title has hidden within it. The title mentions hidden narratives.
Yeah,
In an era of 24-hour news, what
yeah.
are the specific stories, just briefly, about African migration that the mainstream media is completely missing or ignoring? Just briefly.
Okay, yes. Again, the human system is very, very complex and it is also very, very dynamic. Except you dig deeper, you will not look at aspects that are still not seen. And the media too, media is fast-paced, especially in the 21st century world of digital communication that we are in. Because of the fast pace, they probably have little or no time for concentrated overview of issues. Because of this, it is responsibility of the scholar, yeah, who has some commitment into areas of specialization to dig deeper, to look beyond what the media is reporting, to look beyond what is in the literature, and try to unearth narratives that have not been tool or that are being ignored. Now, for instance, we're talking about some of these things. What are the things that I'm probably referring to by hidden? Now, I am not sure really literature has concentrated so much on how people um, lose their minds in migration, for instance, how people lose their minds in migration, and of course, how people are die-hearted about migration, imagining that migration is synonymous with progress. And of course, not just being overly die-harded. What about the many things they do to make these things happen? What about resort to mystics and mysticism, the quests, or the emplacement of musical powers, thinking that it will take them through the Mediterranean, make them evade, Western police, Western borders, then what about the extent to which parents relations go to support, younger ones desiring migration? Then are we looked at the economic consequences of exporting capital? Every time we talk about capital exportation, maybe through, we talk about remittances. What about capital that is being exported from Africa through stolen wealth? Then, of course, through the sale of individual properties to be able to fund the migration. And this thing is continuing. It's not just at the point of departure, but also by the time some of them get onto Western societies. What about the properties back home that they sell or that they get their relatives to sell, so that they can navigate, the legal hurdles placed before them, by Western societies, rightly or wrongly? Are we seeing this as also capital exploitation that is depleting opportunities for development in Africa? Why are we not looking at these dimensions? Then what about the fact that yes, we concentrate most of the time on the youths. What about the leaders themselves who, just as the youth, don't believe in African countries, and that's why they believe in the concept of Plan B. They need to have a Plan B country, and by the time they have it, at the end of the day, what do they want to do? They want to have a house in the place, and when they have that house at the end of the time, at the end, they want to return back to Africa, thinking that Africa is the only place where they can make the kind of money they can make. And this return is just not, it's not just when they are alive alone. It will also be when they are dead, further to African cosmology that believes that the end of migration, the end of migration cycle is actually return to ancestral home, whether alive or dead. So most of the time they want to be buried at home, but of course now that the cost is becoming prohibitive, some of them don't mind being buried in the distance. But these are some of the hidden aspects that we're not laying emphasis on. And if moves have to be made, if measures have to be taken to mitigate or reduce the question of migration, then of course we have to concentrate or look at these hidden aspects, which will lead us to reshaping the psychology of the Africans. It doesn't matter the age now because the predilection for migration is intergenerational. It comes across class, across income group. It's a default belief on the part of the average African to experience Western societies, thinking that it is El Dorado, they're thinking that it is next to heaven. And of course, if you have not made it, or if you do not make it, and then you have not become. Then finally, among those I can quickly remember now, is the culture that is also embedded in the average African. Where in discussions, in conversations, even in official circles, there's this, predominance of Western travels, as a theme of this discussion. They valorize Western accents, very openly without necessarily knowing that it is neo-colonial. They take pride in wearing Western fashion without necessarily knowing that it is undermining their own cultures and tradition. And of course, they undermine the one who has probably not been there. I saw that the one who has not been there is also thinking of just going there, even if it's to spend one week or 2 weeks. And by the time he comes back, he's quick to tell stories or to convey sessions where stories of his experience will be told. And of course, again, they also enjoy letting you know how expensive their apparels, their costumes are, from high-end shops in Western cities, just to demonstrate the fact that they also belong or the fact that they are also Bintus.
Okay, this is the time I want to call in Chimamanda Adichie because she talks about the burden of a single story. the danger of a single story. Mainstream media often portrays migration as a crisis or a threat. How does your book help readers unlearn these biases and see the agency and humanity of migrants themselves? I know you have brought in the psychological, the cultural, the sociological, the financial, but how does this book help readers to unlearn some of these biases?
Yeah, I think migration is historical. And because it is historical, we may not be able to typify it within a bracket. Even before slavery, there were migration in Africa. People were migrating from one place to the other between Senegal and Gambia, in between Zimbabwe and South African countries in East Africa, Ethiopia. There were some kinds of migration. Then eventually, of course, we had religious migration leading to pilgrimages. We had the whole empires. Mansa Musa is there. El Kanemi is there. Of course, these were rich people sponsoring migrants, even though religious migrants. We had the old trade routes, African trade routes. People moving to trade in different parts, and then eventually we had slavery that disrupted this process. But it was also some kind of forced migration, as the case could be. Eventually, we had colonialism that disrupted African traditional systems. The disruption creates some kind of other kinds of migration. Of course, we started having artificial territories, which meant that migration may not necessarily be seamless anymore. It has to come with some levels of permission. There was also post-colonial disruptions, which is still continuing somewhat. But it's integral to development, really, for us to have people coming and going, joining and not joining, dwelling and exiting. It's somewhat integral because at the very advanced level, it fosters difference, creates appreciation and spices up, homogeneity. Here we're talking about the beauty of heterogeneity. It's been historical and may be difficult for us to deny it. But the problem we have really is the fact that it is skewed. And of course, the direction of migration is rather towards a direction, Western societies. And the average southern country is looking westward, really. Predominantly, that's what it is. And that's what it has been until the rise of, countries in Asia and the South Pacific, notably China, India, Malaysia, Singapore. And those days, people will come to the West from those parts and will not want to go back. But these days, they come and they will want to go back. But the narrative has still not been reversed in Africa. And people go to this predominant interest of migrants in destination, Western societies, and not necessarily want to go back because they cannot find hope back in Africa, perpetually so. If this cuteness can be reversed a little bit, and if migration is sort of respectable in the way the average Westerner will go to other parts of the world and be called expatriates and be called tourists. If and they are not necessarily called migrants, then are they called diasporic citizens or members of the Western diaspora? No, they are not. They are rather seen as tourists, expatriates, or adventurers, sort of, people who have come to do research or sort of. But our own case is not like that. We are seen as refugees, people in crisis, people in conflict, people affected by disease. But how can we change the narrative if not for the countries, to be introspective, for the leaders to rise above the preponderant thoughts of the people, to be different from the pack of the people and to get their minds decolonized, and how can they get their minds decolonized, by building institutions, building structures that can support stability and sustainability such that people can reinvest their hope in their own fatherland, motherland, ancestral land, as the case could be, Prof.
Yes. You've spoken a lot about the emotional geography.
Yeah.
And I would like you to categorize for me those, especially scholars, who have one leg in Africa and also have homes in Europe, in America, and some in some other parts of Africa. Um, the feeling of lost homes and fractured families. How did you deal with this in the book?
Yeah, it's very, very tragic, really. And first, with African scholars who are circular migrants, the way I want to put it, you can't necessarily blame them. They are also natives, native Africans, who will have to be part of the practice, experience different parts of the world, if not for survival, it could be for epistemic reasons. So in trying to do that, they are also trying to grow their own experience, their own
Mm,
reality of the world, considering where they originated from. But the other important thing you mentioned is, emotional geography. Yes, I agree. Then, of course, fractured intimacies, which is not avoidable because we are seeing African wives increasingly encouraging their husbands to migrate while they remain behind. They should go ahead first and prepare ground for them to come. And eventually, some of them, it doesn't get to happen. After some time, the relationship begins to fracture. We are seeing situations where sometimes it is the woman that will move first, the husband will remain behind and be remitting funds to the wife and children. Then eventually, because there's no intimacy, because there's no communication, there will be breakdown of emotion, there will be breakdown of sentiment and intimacy, and it will lead to fracture. We have seen people living in Western society, in a particular Western society, then suddenly they consider that one inappropriate. They move to the next one, leave one of the family member behind, and that one moves to another place, and you see where a family, a wife is in Canada, husband is in America, children, one of the kids is in UK, the other one is in France, another one is in Australia. All of them, dispersed, fragmented. You can't have bonding in that circumstance. Can we blame them? Where is the circumstances that they find themselves? They're looking for better grounds, greener pastures, so to say. But is it really available? Can the narrative change? How do we reverse it? Is it likely to stop or to continue? I think it's going to continue for obvious reasons. Even if it's going to stop, it's going to take a very long time, because
mm,
the mental states of the African, of the one that has been deprived, it's so unfortunately deeply so that reversing it can be a long-term project, not just because such projects can be Herculine because the West is not also stopping in its development. They keep moving
mm,
forward. Why Africans, where these people are coming from, is regressing, mainly on account of bad leadership and because the leaders are also participants in the
mm,
exodus, like Paul Collier,
mm,
and like it is said in the scripture too, because they are also participants. Then changing the narrative would not just be a matter of pronouncement, but will also be a function of their actions. But is
mm,
their action reflecting this direction? I dare say no.
mm. Somebody once said that everyone to himself or herself, but technology for us all. You know, that in places where we name our boats apartments, we live apart. But the television is what brings us all together in our different homes. And that's where I would like to talk about the role of technology, because you've talked about these geographically dispersed Nigerians, geographically dispersed scholars all around the world. As an expert in digital communication, how are social media and digital homes changing the way African migrants stay connected to their roots compared to previous generations?
Yeah, and it's because of this development. Of course, humanity is thankful to the frenetic changes in communication, to the revolution in technologies of communication that has brought about digital media, and from there we're having. From it, we're also having social media platforms where people can relate in real time, across distances, And of course, they can do that through video calls, voice calls, messages, and it is instantaneous, So it actually mitigates the pangs of distance, but it doesn't make it disappear,
Mm,
irrespective of what Francis King-Cross described as the death of distance. It reduces it, helps to mitigate longing, mitigate nostalgia, it helps to rekindle memories and somewhat encourages it. So the fact of co-parents, the sense of co-location that results on account of the digital media is somewhat different from those days when communication was happening through surface mail alone, through
mm,
all kinds of telephone. Now it is immediate, you can get a response. I'm talking to you now, you're talking to me now from a distance that I cannot imagine. I cannot even try to start calculating it. And that's the power of technology. So it's a development that is salutary, and it is redefining, um, how migrants relate, how the diasporic community relates. It's empowering them because they now have a way, to narrativize their story in the way they want, and they do not have to wait for others to do the narration for them. Those days, people were doing it for them, but now they can do it themselves because they are empowered on account of possessing the smartphone. And I imagine there's a development that's going to continue, even in sophistication, even in complexity. But again, in the world of artificial intelligence, we can only, make projections. We can't be too sure of the direction that we're going. But the fact of sophistication being increasingly so is almost concrete.
Well, you're still on to Bookchat, and our guest today, towards the end of the year, is no other person than Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Now, I want you to just weigh in on this. There's a particular Professor Yeku, James Yeku, and I think he's of Michigan University. He says that when we talk about migration, we talk about what the migrants enjoy, but we forget what they leave behind. What would be your take on that? Is it really an issue? What what are the kind of things people who migrate? What are the kind of things, material and immaterial cultures that they leave behind? Before I take you on that beautiful expression of yours, contestation of place. So tell me, what is your feeling about this whole idea of what they left behind?
Yeah, excellent take, Prof. I think that's again what I refer to somewhat that migration question is multi-dimensional. It is a polycentric mafia, not necessarily monocentric, because there are dimensions to it, and the dimensions are multiplying and increasingly so. What they leave behind, are quite multidimensional as well, if I can repeat that word for the uptent time. Um, yeah, not just one thing. They are leaving, most of the time, they are leaving families behind. They are leaving their ancestry behind. They are leaving prospect behind to some extent in situations where if they had tarried a while, perhaps progress would have been registered. And they're also leaving the possibility of development behind in addition. But the leaving behind we're talking about, is it complete now? Is it completely so? Considering the contemporariness of modern times, where we live in a spatial world, it's not necessarily about territory or location. You can be, we referred to it earlier, you can be in one location and yet you can be in multiple locations at the same time on account of digital technology. And that's why the old question of imagination of home is gradually disappearing, because the home you would have left behind, or the home that you would have missed, is right before you on the screen. And people at home are communicating before you. They could also be on the screen. So there is a fundamental mitigation of this. There is a reduction in the way nostalgia is framed and formed. and in a way it is mitigated, because that feeling, that emotional loss, that sentimental attachment, these things are increasingly being withheld, and distance is being withheld, which is why memorialization can be not just on the screens, but can be triggered as long as you register your presence, through responding to messages, through making contributions, and through participation in the digital spaces, and continuously so. Then, of course, yes, we probably naturally have left some things behind, but those things that you leave behind are still going with you. So you are
Mm.
leaving the village, but you are carrying the village along. Because
Hmm.
again, even in physical terms, you see how people, when they are traveling, the little things that they travel with, the kind of things they eat, their cuisines, their costumes, all those things help them to memorialize in the distance. Because they can still dress in the African way, in the way they used to dress. So the sense of place is gradually thinning out,
Mm.
because of technologies, and because of the way people have learned to cope with being in the distance, and again, because of new narratives, as the case could be.
Well, we're wrapping up because, time is such a tyrant. Most of us will wish that we could continue this, but I have like two important questions I need to ask. And one of it is, what do you envisage the impact on policy for this to be? If a policymaker in the global north, in Europe, in America, and in all of those places where money flows like water, so I think, if a policymaker in the global north or within the African Union read this book, what is one hidden narrative you hope will change the way they draft immigration laws? So we're looking at two poles. We're looking at those in the global north, in Europe, in America, in Asia, and we're also looking at the African Union. How do you think this book will mediate new immigration laws?
Yeah, I think it will deal with the question of um, the psychology of the African, the neo-colonial states of the African mind, um, that that completely externalizes hope. So discouraging migration, like the EU tries to do, another multilateral organization, through providing opportunities for people in Africa, may not just be enough, because why do we still have the rich people investing heavily abroad? And when I'm talking about investment, I'm not talking about economic investment. They buy properties abroad, send their children to foreign schools, create alternative homes, plan B, in these societies, despite their comfort in Africa. Why do they do that? They are doing that because there's this deep-seatedness of of their mindset, in this mindset, that the African country is not a country, it's not the continent of the future. African continent is not the continent of the future. The African nations, prepared many of them, that is, will one someday collapse.
Mm.
You can see this unfortunate belief system, and it is there. You will not say it, but it is hidden. It is hidden. You know, you need to communication can be two-sided, really. One in the open, then the other one in the closet. You need to know what they think deep in their minds, about the countries of Africa, about the countries that they are leading. There's complete faithlessness, and that's why you see a whole lot of difference between what they say and what they do. They say something good, something godly, something good for the ears, but they do something that is completely different. And one of the things that they do differently is to behave the same way like the youths are doing, thinking that there's no faith in the African country, but rather the faith is outside. So let's have things outside. Now, anybody who wants to help Africa in the future will have to devise ways of managing the minds of the average African, and not at adulthood, but from adolescence, from primary, secondary education, the way people are proselytized, the way people are acculturated into religion, and the way religion is built into us, that most of us are either Christians or Muslim or animists, that's the way we need to be reoriented away from thinking about migration, as the only way to progress. Progress can come in other ways, and when we're talking about migration in this context, we're not saying that migration that is reasonable and qualitative should not be embarked upon in the way Western society members go up to Africa for work, for tourism, for adventure, and for research and all of that. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that one that is, that is completely hopeless, where people move because they are hopeless, they don't have hope in their own climate, and thinking that hope lies elsewhere is the one that we need to deal with.
Well, the grass, they say, is always greener on the other side. It's just a matter of perspective, what you're seeing and when you're seeing it. It is that time when I have to bid you all um, Happy New Year, Happy 2026. But before I do that, it is always a case of takeaway. If a reader walks away with only one new perspective after finishing your book, New Hidden Narratives, what would you want that to be? If you had authority over what a reader takes, just for the sake of it, what do you think a reader should take away? A new perspective.
Yeah, yeah. The perspective is that the story of migration is a continuing one, and we do not have to look at it from one dimension. Like you said earlier of Superman that uses statement, it is multidimensional, but the dimension of the African is completely unique and it needs to be focused on. And in focusing on it, it should be oriented, the orientation should be towards mitigating needs, and the mitigation process should start from the beginning and not from the top. It should be bottom up, and not only at the top, so that we can deal with it at the level of reduction, at the level of making it more reputable, more meaningful, so that we can take our pride of place in the committee of continents, as the case.
Well, thank you very much. You all have been on Bookchat, and it's been quite a ride in 2025. We've spoken to as many of the scholars as have books to share with us. And in 2026, it's not going to be any different. And that's why I want to say a very big thank you to Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi. Those who know the meaning of that name know that he's one of those who celebrate during this time of year. And I can assure you, whatever goodies that he prepared during that time, he will pass it on to all those who encounter his voice on this program. Dr. Adeniyi, it's been a great pleasure having you as the last masquerade in 2025. And it is the big masquerade that actually dances at the ritual event. I say thank you very much, and I hope when your next book comes out, Bookchat will be one of the stops that you will migrate to. Thank you very much, Dr. Abiodun.
Thank you very much, Prof. I appreciate this opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.